I recently got to do a wonderful coaching session with Easy Exarti, who is a high level player who does a ton of competitive play and has done a ton of the Masters tours, competed at very high levels. And when working through our games, he was suggesting that, some of the time, I think I was actually getting a little bit too hyped up in the big moments of the decks. And I really need to take it back to basics. So that's what we're going to talk about in this video. And that concept of kind of taking a step back and just looking at the basics can really help you improve your play. So some of the basics that I might be mentioning here, things like playing for tempo. Yes, maybe there's a little bit of discussion of what tempo actually means, but basically playing things out on the board, using cards efficiently, but maybe not always at best case scenario. Things like I've talked about in some of these other videos, going face instead of trading, or thinking about the game plan of the deck overall. Does it want to push damage? Do you have spells that deal damage? Well, if that's the case, you want to be pushing damage throughout the whole game so that you can work towards closing out the game with one or two of those spells. Those are more basics. And even when a deck looks like it has swing turns and big potential, yeah, those are going to happen in some games. Definitely. We've seen that over Hearthstone's history with cards like Edwin in various forms. Whenever that is very popular in the meta, creating those big bodies. I think even some of the Jade decks kind of had that big swing feel. We've seen that in more recent metas with big pushes of just filling up the board with large bodies or going very wide for very cheap mana because things have been discounted. Those big swing turns all definitely can happen and do happen, but they don't happen in every single game. And that's one of the big takeaways for this video is, what do you do when you aren't hitting those big swing turns? If you aren't finding the cards to create those big swings, that's when you really have to look at going back to basics in the game. Yeah, maybe you have to just create a minion that ends up being a 4/4 instead of waiting and then building up to be able to create a 9/9 or 10/10, because the time that you've spent waiting for those cards to show up in your hand, you might have lost the game. Or you're just putting yourself in a position where you are about to lose the game, depending on the deck you're playing against. So really going back to those basics and creating situations for yourself where you are using your mana or using a card, maybe not to its full potential, but for something that's still pretty okay. Those are the cases where you can actually improve your win rates incrementally. And doing that can bump your win rates by several to maybe even double-digit percents, depending on how you've maybe been playing a certain deck. So really stop and think when you're playing, am I waiting around for my deck to work for me? Or am I creating situations that are getting me closer to what my deck wants to do? Now, maybe there's cases where you do need to wait a little bit. If you're trying to find that one key card, it might not come, especially if it's a legendary. So you do have to figure out what other ways can get you towards that end goal of winning the game. Or are there plays that you can make where maybe it just stalls another turn or two until you can do something that feels a little bit better or more impactful? Those are the kind of plays that really separate good players from great players. Now, I would love to hear some examples of how you have shifted some of your gameplay to incorporate that back to basics style of thinking. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for checking this one out. And if you're interested in even more tips, tricks, and strategies, make sure you check out the whole playlist here.